Everyone, welcome to Economic Demise of the Soviet Union. Thank you all for being here on a Saturday morning. My name is Debbie Davis. I work with FTE. I coordinate our teacher programs, and I just want to quickly go over some Zoom expectations before we go on with the rest of our day. So the first expectation that we have is we really want your camera on. This is important for participation, knowing that you're here. And if you are for some reason unable to have your camera on, please message me directly and I'll make note of that. Again, we have these expectations so that you can receive your stipend. So our second expectation is that please change your Zoom name to your first and last name that you use to register for this program. This is really important for when we are taking attendance, and if your name is something like iPhone 7, I'm not going to know who you are. So please make sure your Zoom name is your first and last name. And lastly, please participate. Again, this is an expectation for if you are going to receive your stipend, which, we want you to receive that. You're spending all of your time here. So that means participating in the breakout rooms, typing in the chat, unmuting yourself when you can and feel comfortable to do so. And again, me and the other staff will be monitoring attendance and participation all day so that you can receive your stipend. All right. So again, you can message me directly if you have any technical issues or feel like you can't meet one of these expectations either. So I want to quickly just go over the agenda for today. We are, starting today at 11:40 a.m. Eastern time. I'm not in Eastern time, as I don't think maybe a lot of us aren't, but this is an Eastern time. So we'll move on to a lecture after this. We'll have a short 10-minute break, have an activity, then another lecture. We'll go into our lunch break at 1:40 p.m., move into another activity and lecture, another break, then an activity lecture. We'll wrap up with our program evaluation, which is required to do for the stipend. And then we will end at 5 p.m. Eastern time. All right, so I just want to take a second to introduce our presenters for the day. We have Malhaz and Austin. So Malhaz has been working for FTE since 2011, and Austin has been here for about 3 years. So they know a lot, and have done a lot of different workshops and seminars throughout the years between the both of them. And so they'll be leading us today in the lessons and activities. So I'll turn it over to them now.
Malhaz, I don't know if you caught it in the chat. I'm gonna go back and find it really great. This has to be like a proud moment for you, Malhaz. This is from Luke Ayers. Hello from North Texas, especially to Malhaz. You taught me an AP macro in 2015.
Luke. Oh, wow.
Hi.
That has to be
Hi.
such a cool moment.
That is really cool. I didn't recognize the name when I was looking at the things.
So Malhaz,
Yeah.
you taught AP macro. What else are you up to these days, Malhaz?
Thank you.
Do some quick updates.
Well, welcome everybody. Welcome, and thank you so much for coming to this program. I really enjoyed this program. As Debbie mentioned, I've been teaching with FTE for a long time, so 2011. And this is one of my favorite programs that I teach. We used to have it as kind of residential program sometimes, and sometimes it's a online long-term program, and now it's a one-day program condensed. But overall, just barely. And the reason why this is one of my favorite programs is that I was born in Soviet Union. I am from Republic of Georgia, Eastern Europe. I came to the United States when I was 16 years old in 1992. So I went to the high school in Austin, Texas, to the same high school that Luke graduated, because I ended up teaching it there also at the same time in Liberal Arts Science Academy. So I've been a teacher for AP micro and macroeconomics since 2004 for a long time. And now I'm in Virginia and I'm teaching it both AP micro and macroeconomics at Thomas, Virginia School for Science and Technology. and kind of going through and finishing up the PhD in economics. Although I'm taking a little bit of break because I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old that when they were born put in a wrecking ball into any kind of a free time that I would have. So, but again, I teach in high school, and I've been teaching with FTE for a long time, both residential programs and a lot of the programs like this. But part of the thing is that what I really enjoy teaching this program specifically is the history of the Soviet Union. And as Georgian, I have a different perspective. Well, first of all, I was young. I was 16. When I was 16, I moved here. I was 16 years old. It was just me. My family didn't move. I just moved to Austin with the host family and got lucky and stayed here in the United States and went to UT Austin. But my experiences in Soviet Union were not bad because, and I'll divulge the information. My grandfather was a KGB captain, so I didn't realize that I had a lot of privileges that 99% of the people in there didn't. So I had to relearn and look back at the history and look through some of my memories and examples and everything else, and then kind of squared with that and realized that I had a really good childhood, but I was living in a prison. This is why one of the reasons that I really kind of enjoyed it. It's kind of like a trip down the memory lane with kind of economic perspective that I hope that you guys will enjoy. All right. Well, thank you, and welcome again. And then Austin.
Yeah, I'm Austin Green. I am here in Atlanta, Georgia. Let me maybe apologize right off the ground. I am slightly under the weather, and we all know what that's like as teachers. You just suck it up and you get through it. So if you see me chugging a whole bunch of water, I promise I'm okay. I'm excited to do this program also, to be here with this. This is actually in terms of some of the activities that I use in my classroom. I use all of these activities in some way, shape, or form within about the first 2 weeks. Whether it's the activity in its entirety or kind of take short segments and kind of merge some together. I teach AP Microeconomics and AP Macroeconomics at Milton High School here in Atlanta, Georgia. And along with that, man, what else do I do? I do a lot of workshops for FTE. I was just out in Vegas last week. Yeah, last weekend. My days are running together right now. Doing a workshop with them. So it's one of the coolest things that I get to do. And I think probably what I love most is just being able to talk with teachers about kind of pedagogy and strategy and like, hey, how do you make this work? How do you make an activity like this work with, 15 kids? How do you make an activity like this work with 10 kids? And so really, really like doing that. Saw a lot of you are from the Texas area, or a handful of you. I grew up in Dallas, Texas, but I've been in Atlanta now for 25 years, something like that. So really glad to spend our Saturday with you guys, and really excited for what Malhaz is going to share on the history side. As a history major, I'm really excited about that. Yeah, I think Malhaz, I'm gonna turn it over to you and kind of get us kicked off with our first lecture on kind of the lead into the Soviet Union. We'll make sure we got.
Thank you, Austin.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, I mean, before we get started, just kind of looking at the agenda that we have, the way the lectures we have organized in here, kind of look at chronological. It says that, the first lecture is Journey of Choices up to 1939, and then, continues on to to 1963, 1980s, and then the fall, for Gorbachev and fall. But with my experience, the way this goes, a lot of times, we might not be able to finish everything that I need to cover in my first lecture, but I continue on. So it's, don't let this be the exact guide, because we'll cover everything that we need to cover, but we want to respect your time when we, finish, and give you guys breaks and everything else. And also I want to make sure that Austin has plenty of time for his activities, because unlike lectures when we're doing activities, these are the great, this is a great thing from FTE programs that we do a lot of hands-on activities that students really learn these economic concepts in a visceral way. And in here, in a virtual setting, we got to do the breakout groups and this, and sometimes that takes a little bit longer. So I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for him also. But that being said, please, please, please chime in, ask me questions when I'm lecturing, make a comment, and I'm going through this material. The best way, I mean, sometimes people raise their hand and sometimes I may not be able to see it or anything else, but you can just turn on the camera and just chime in as I'm talking. That is okay, because then that way, if I'm really engaging, I don't see your hand or I don't see the icon for the hand, I want to respond. So let us get started. As we mentioned, let me share right now my lecture notes, not lecture notes, but the lecture slides.
Malhaz, while you're doing that, I'll let them know we will be sharing everything with you at the end. We've got a link that has all of Malhaz's lectures. It's got all of the activity slides for the different activities that we're doing. So don't worry about that. You will definitely be getting all of that at the very end.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. You will have everything in here, but I wanted to do that because sometimes people might want to open up the slides. This is a PowerPoint. This is a PDF of the slides that I have. If you want to follow it and look through that, doesn't have as much detail in here. I mostly am talking and presents a guide and some kind of a key list in here of what we're going to be talking about. But this is the thing that I'm going to share. Now let me go ahead and share my screen also, and we can get started. Everybody sees that? Austin, do you see it? Okay, great. Now I want to make sure that I have as much of the room so I can kind of see as many participants in here also. So let me go ahead and get started. All right. So as I said, okay, we're going to be talking about economic demise in Soviet Union. So Soviet Union, I mean, there's a lot to talk about, obviously, but our lens is going to be looking at economics and economic history, and also especially how that kind of created a domino effect with other supporting pillars of the Soviet Union. And for that, we use this analogy of the three-legged stool, that you can think of like a political and legal pillar as one of the legs that really represents political structure. When we talk about dictatorship, you had communism, but you had dictatorship of proletariat, and really it was mostly a dictatorship, a very brutal, very strong leg in that sense, because it really kind of created a strong level of control. And the next one is the moral cultural, which is basically big part that you can think of it as a buy-in of the people of the Soviet Union into the system. Now, of course, a lot of them were coerced, but at the same time, you also had a buy-in due to some of the successes and due to some of the expectations of those individuals. So as that moral cultural leg, if there's a stronger buy-in and stronger run into being a good communist and good member of the overall this communist and socialist state, that strengthens the whole system overall. And the third one is the economic leg, right? How efficiently and effectively did they actually function and provide things that people really needed? When we talk about economics, economics is the study of human choice, of how individuals choose, but overall, it's how do we determine what to produce, for whom to produce, and how to produce it, and in the most efficient way. Because efficiency is not just simply the fact that we want to, we want to be really efficient and effective, but it's also that we use least amount of resources to satisfy as much wants. There was a lot of wants that needed to be satisfied in Soviet Union. Out of these three legs, so again, as I mentioned, the political leg represented the kind of leadership and the structure and dictatorship, and also, repression that was part of that control structure. The moral leg represented, and you can kind of see the moral leg is just buy-in, but also at the same time, the structural buy-in, where you had pioneers. When you see the students in here in the red little kind of scarves, I remember I used to be the one where you have these kind of things in the school, and everybody was, this pioneers was this kind of a communist party, but for the kids. It's very much kind of like the Boy Scouts in here, the Girl Scouts, except much more organized and much more directed, and there was a lot of propaganda that was provided. And then afterwards we went to Komsomol, which was, once you graduated from high school, that you were part of the Komsomol, and then after that the political party, and everybody was part of the Communist Party. If you were not part of the Communist Party as a member, you really didn't have you didn't have much of the access to a lot of the opportunities too. So everybody, by default to some extent, was part of the Communist Party. And then the last one is an economic leg, and this is the weakest leg that we're going to look at. This is what we're going to be focusing on. This is the weakest leg, in the sense that, from what we talk about in terms of communist structure, communism versus capitalism. And overall, the effectiveness of that system to provide for the goods and services. And that was one of the most important, that was the weakest leg. And as we're going to see, the reason is that throughout this lectures and throughout this timeline that I'm going to be looking at, the economic leg wobbles and pretty much collapses, although that is not enough to kind of to topple the system overall, because the legal and the political leg was very strong, and cultural moral leg was somewhat buy-in was there up to maybe mid 80s or so, but then that's one of the ways that analogies they can think of why the Soviet Union collapsed and what are the things that contributed to it. All right, so now I want to tread a little bit on Austin's territory briefly. One of the activities that he's going to do is going to be about opportunity cost, the basic economic concept in economics. Is opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is the benefits of the foregone alternative, or the next best alternative given up. And we generally tend to think of opportunity cost from individual standpoint. Individuals, we make a decision to buy something, you give up something. Choosing is refusing. Okay? That's basically what that term is. The choosing is refusing. But what we want to look at from this perspective is, what were the decisions of the leaders? And the leaders were choosing not for themselves, but for the society. And especially in there where you didn't have much of the say that the population and peasants and others had, the choices of the leaders represented the alternatives foregone for the entire society. So that's why we call this journey of choices, because these were the choices that were made. But we want to see, I want to go back to this, the alternative. The alternative is very difficult, because alternative is counterfactual. Counterfactual basically means that I'm sitting here and doing the lecture, providing that. The counterfactual is that what would I be doing if I weren't doing this? Well, I'd be playing with my kids. Well, I'm just popping in right now. Sorry. Sorry. So um, all right. So the counterfactual, which just became more of a reality now, is you really don't know what is happening because you're not really engaged in that, right? For example, if my little kid didn't pop in right now, then I would not know exactly what I would be playing with him and doing other things like that. So that's the alternative. And alternative, only you know what is the value of that in your head. Even then, you try to guess what is the value of that. So when we're talking about from the perspective of the leaders, the leaders, many of them were making decisions that for the society, and the society was basically it's not like yeah, of course they had their own private interests to make sure that they had the benefits that they received, but at the same time they cared for the people, right? They really wanted the success, right? But the choosing is refusing. You had to refuse so much of the consumer goods, so much of the other things when you were looking at industrialization and the entire investment in rebuilding and industrializing Soviet Union. There was a lot that had to be given up, and they were the ones who were making choices without individuals taking a chance. So I kind of went off a little bit on here, but you guys will talk about that when you do the activity. So let's talk about now prior to Soviet Union. Good. My little kid is gone now. I don't know if any of you remember there was prior to pandemic, there was a CNN reporter or something that when his kids popped in when he was actually presenting. And everybody realized afterwards during pandemic, oh, this is how it feels like when you have your family in here and you're working at the same time. Okay. So let's talk about prior to the Soviet Union, when we talk about the Russian Empire. And at the time of the Russian Empire, about as we see in here in 1910, Russia represented more than a quarter of the world production of wheat. So it was a breadbasket of the world. It was a major producer, so major agricultural producer. He had a low literacy, 3% literacy, and it had serfdom, and he had very much feudal kind of a system. We all know that. And he was just beginning to industrialize, but the wealth was highly concentrated. Okay. But the main thing that I want to highlight in here is the fact that, look, we are looking at Russia that is starting to develop, but at the same time, it already has a major production of the agricultural goods. And these are the benchmarks that we're going to be looking at that say, okay, if we change the political and economic system, what happens to these benchmarks? Do we have more prosperity? And more prosperity will be measured by more grain, more wheat production, more industrial production, or other things like that, or is it not? So these are the things that we're going to be looking at. Also, another part is that we all know that it was an empire. Now I'm going to do kind of go off on a tangent again too, because a lot of the part of the three-legged stool that we're talking about, it's a good way of kind of visualizing the society in a sense, is that not only did you have this kind of a structure, that you had a strong political legal structure in here, strong in the sense that the Romanovs had a very tight control over the society, even though it was a very big territory that they were controlling. But the moral buy-in wasn't there in a sense. But on one hand, the pride of being part of a larger empire is really part of this kind of a Russian identity. And it is part of this identity that they view as kind of a empire that has emerged since Byzantium, that is a kind of a protectorate of the Orthodox religion that they view from that perspective. And part of that contributes to the buy-in of the people, even though you're talking about the peasants and you're talking about the serfs that really don't have much of the power, right? We want to look at that because why is it that we're studying this? The Soviet Union collapsed a long time ago. And these programs, last, and sometimes I even wonder why some people sign up for it, because it happened a long time ago, right? We can look at history, but at the same time, it's very relevant. It's very relevant with what's going on right now. Very relevant what's going on right now in the world. It's very relevant to what's going on right now in Russia also. There's different parallels in terms of the pendulum swinging of what is happening to development of Russia. And that same sense of buy-in as an empire still exists and represents this kind of this is my point of view, and this is my opinion. I want to be very clear about that. Represents this kind of a buy-in and presents this kind of silent majority of Russians who are supporting the horrific events of what is happening in Ukraine. And not just in Ukraine. Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, and slowly started invading Ukraine, and then it was a full-scale invasion. And there's a tremendous cost to Russian society and individuals also, in terms of human loss, in terms of economic loss, and overall political systems. But my sense of it is that belief of a great Russia, right, empire, is somewhat of a part of this kind of a Russian identity that really allows them to, burden this really high cost, even though morally, it is reprehensible what happened. I think it's a kind of interesting perspective to take because, again, it puts a different kind of parallels with what is happening right now. And I'll come back and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Okay, so now World War I. So very quickly, I'm going to go through that because I want to make sure that we're on time. And again, please stop, ask me questions if you want me to focus on something else. Just be aware, I do not see, I know some of you may be typing something in the chat, but because I have so many things on the screen, it's easier for me if you really do want to make a comment or a question to ask me, turn on the camera and ask.
Hey Malhaz, I'm monitoring the chat too. So I just saw a couple things here. Chris said I think it could reasonably be argued that Russia has never known a true democracy. I don't know if maybe you want to touch on that if you'll come back to it.
Yeah,
and,
of course. Yeah.
Heather also had regarding the 36% of wheat production in 1910. Ukraine didn't exist in 1910, so a considerable amount of that wheat production should have come from the territory that is now Ukraine, correct?
That is absolutely true. And when we go back, let me go back to that thing. Noticing here, it's territory of Ukraine, but Russian Empire at around that time, this is 1913, but Russian Empire at the time controlled the territory of Ukraine to some extent, big part of the territory of Ukraine. So Ukraine is a major producer and has always been a major producer of wheat, except during these disruptions of World War I, and then the horrible events of World War II, and then Holodomor, which was basically the starvation that was caused by Stalin during 1930s. Even now, Ukraine is a major producer of wheat, a major producer of grain. So that is a big part of it. But at the same time, the Russian Empire did control part of this territory. So when we talk about Russia, at the time, we talk about Russian Empire, which includes many of those. Which unfortunately, include Georgia, including many of the former Soviet Union republics at the time. The other question you mentioned about the democratization, from my perspective, and we're going to get to that a little bit later on when we look at kind of at the end, when we look at the collapse of the Soviet Union. At the end of the collapse of the Soviet Union and Yeltsin's time is the closest, in my opinion, that Russia has come to some sense of decentralized democratic structures. But it never really made that jump because in order to, when you decentralize the structures, when you have a dictatorship and you take away the dictatorship and you decentralize, you don't have institutions, you have kind of a chaos that emerges, and the economic structures and economic outputs suffers quite a bit, and people suffer. So when this is another program that we teach, is the socialism, the realities of socialism, which I just taught in Alexandria last weekend, and looks at examples of countries like Poland, Baltic countries, and Scandinavian countries, and how do we define what is socialism or not, and what happens to economic output when that happens. But when we're talking, what I want to mention here is that Poland, when they made the transition from Soviet system, when they became independent, they did a shock therapy, and they made this very fast reforms and deep reforms and move as fast as possible. The reason why you want to move as fast as possible is that when you have this kind of chaos emerging, there's this kind of pushback from the people saying that even though old system wasn't as good, it's better than what we have right now. So you want to make sure that you get some light at the end of the tunnel from the reforms, so that you can tell the people, hey, look, we are moving in the right direction, even though we have to take this bitter pill and go through the bad times. And many countries try to democratize, but never make it because of that kind of a pushback. And Russia has always kind of reverted back to this kind of a dictatorship. And Yeltsin's time was closest to that. But then the oligarchical structures and the capturing of the industries and everything else by oligarchy, and this kind of I wouldn't say free market, but more like robber baron capitalism that emerged, really kind of brought people, against that system, saying that, hey, we don't want that. This is worse, and they would rather have a king, and they would rather have a dictator rather than the chaos of 90s. But 90s was the closest that they came to that, in my opinion. Okay, great. So Russian Empire, World War I, horrific results for Russia, and very, very unpopular. And with that, when we talk about that moral cultural leg really kind of collapsing because the buy-in wasn't there anymore. And then at the same time, the Romanovs started to lose the control, and that became the major rallying cry for communists and Bolsheviks and other revolutionaries to overthrow the Romanovs. The losses in World War I and continuous engagement in this war. And when we look at the February Revolution and the provisional government that emerged of that, this was not Bolsheviks, this is Kerensky's government, only lasted 6 months. When they overthrew the Romanovs, the Duma that was created, or the structure that was created, was still this kind of old guard, the people who were elite, who were almost like a feudal lords, and then higher up in the government. And at the beginning, they were very popular because they overthrew this very unpopular Romanov dynasty. Was there a question? You want to turn on the camera? Is it Elder and Sister Durson? I can hear what you're saying, but you can turn on the camera and ask me a question. Okay. But the whole idea here was that they lasted a very short period of time because they really didn't do much, and they really didn't support the peace. People wanted peace. People wanted withdrawal from World War I, but they still kept supporting it. And really, the Bolsheviks, before the February Revolution, there was the provisional government, and the February Revolution happened afterwards and removed the Kerensky government. The Bolshevik Revolution happened in October 1917. Bolsheviks really come in with this this slogan of peace, and also the power to the, obviously, proletariat, to the people. But people really weren't aware of all these extreme policies that they had in terms of collectivization. I mean, some were, but it was not widely viewed. So the propaganda was about the peace, about the bringing Russia out of the World War One, bringing the troops back, giving the power to the people. So they very masterfully kind of managed that. And the term Bolshevik itself in Russian means Bolshoi means big, and when they were fighting against the Socialist Democrats, which at the time were the Mensheviks, which kind of represented the Kerensky government or the people that supported that direction of what Western Europe was going. They termed them Mensheviks. Mensheviks, in Russian means smaller, and Bolshevik means larger. So you can kind of see the propaganda in their name, saying that we are the majority and they are the minority. They obviously use very brutal methods to overthrow. You had a civil war that started between Bolsheviks and Mensheviks at the time. And now Lenin and Bolsheviks were in charge, and they started to implement this very draconian structures of nationalization and really kind of a removal of any kind of a private property, even though when we talk about the serfdom became free, but at the same time there was a lot of peasants that also had their own private property production. As we saw, that a lot of private property production and agricultural production was very effective in the sense that they were producing a lot of agricultural goods. But now you are throwing everybody in the communes. You are basically outlawing any kind of a private ownership of business or anything like that. So those were not really the slogans that they advocated as widely at the beginning. They did say we're going to give the power to the people, and we believe in the communal and social, kind of socialist structures and communist structures. But I don't think people really understood to the extent that what that really meant. So what I want to get to here is that, the political legal leg is strengthened now by Bolsheviks' very brutal control of the structures and this system, political structures. Moral cultural leg is still there to some extent because the buy-in into this revolution and then believe that we might actually have kind of a better path that we're moving. But the economic leg was not there, right? A big part of it is that deals with the failures of the war communism. The term war communism at the time meant that during the Civil War time, 1918 to 1921, before the Bolsheviks really won over the Mensheviks, that very drastic nationalization really led to tremendous decline in output, tremendous decline, and then not only that, but also the starvation and a lot of the problems that emerged in terms of economic output. But a lot of times, Bolsheviks really blamed that because we are in the war right now. Now, briefly, I want to diverge and we'll talk about labor, the value of production in terms of labor. And let's see. Obviously, the basic tenet of the Marxist communism is that labor is the source value, the main source of value of production, of the value of anything that is being produced. Now, there was some distinction in terms of that there might be a high capital labor, high skilled labor, low skilled labor, but even then there is no clear scientific distinction of how you could actually compensate the labor that provided more to the value rather than labor provided less. So because of that, you had this basically equal distribution of income to the people who contributed to the communes. So think of it this way. If you have 10 worker commune, for a simple example, and in the 10 worker commune, in a collective, agricultural collective, each worker is supposed to work about 10 hours. And they produce, let's say, 100 units of output. Well, again, a very simplified example. In this case, let's say that you decide not to work as much. You decide to cut back your contribution to this collective by 50%. So instead of working 10 hours, you work 5 hours. Well, now the total output is 95, right? Instead of 100. But 95 divided by 10 means that you still get the level of return that you get only decreases by 5%. So you decreased your input, you decreased your productivity, your work by 50%, but you're still getting paid or still receiving the resources from the final product in tune of kind of a 95%. So you decrease by 5. So you have an incentive, say, to shirk the work. Obviously, that makes sense when we're looking at it. The opposite example is that maybe you are a person who believes in you start producing and you start working 20% more, and you start working 12 hours instead of 10 hours, right? So you increase your production by your contribution by 20%, but the total output only increases up to 102 units. Divided by 10, you only increase your share by 2%. So again, the very simple calculation like that shows, and then you scale that up all the way to the level of the collectivization, and really to the point where individuals had, even though they knew that they were going to starve to some extent, really didn't have much of the incentive to work because so many others were free riding on that. And then also coupled with a lot of distributional issues in terms of food and in terms of those resources, led to very dramatic results. All right, so we're not going to get to the end of 1939 and other things like that when we talk about Stalin, but I want to talk a little bit about the difference between Lenin and Marx. And then I want to make sure that I give you guys a break, and then we go into the activity. But also, if you have questions or anything like that, when I start the lecture again next, write it down or just let me know, and then I'm more than happy to revisit any of those concepts back. Difference between Lenin and Marx is that Marx's idea of the communism, when we talk about the Marxist, the term, was the fact that it was a democratic process, an irreversible process of what capitalism led to the demise of capitalism just kind of happened naturally, right? The idea. And the idea of the dictatorship of proletariat was not necessarily top-down enforced, but that people would take the power. Now, it wasn't really specifically cleared out how and why and what was the structures and how it would come about. But still, the idea there was that there's different stages of communism. The lower stage of communism, which Marx talks about as socialism, and Lenin talks about as a lower stage of communism, is this kind of a worker state, where state is taken over by workers. But it's not that you have one dictator or one person, but workers collectively come together and take over the resources, and they collectively talk to each other and make decisions. Now you can see the problem that emerges with that of the decision making. You have to have some hierarchical structure for decision making to have somebody who will be a last decision maker. So it wasn't really spelled out by Marx on how it would come about, but he viewed this kind of a socialism as kind of a lower stage of capitalism, which sometimes people may think of it as like a social democratic ideas. But as I'm gonna talk a little bit more about it, is that this eventually leads to stronger and stronger and stronger level of control, where this kind of a democratic taking over of the resources by communes of workers devolves into ownership, or not ownership, but the control by one or few, that it has to emerge from that. But from Lenin's at the time viewed the Soviet Union, it was imposed from the top down. Right? Sure, yeah, of course, you people need to take over the resources, but we're going to give it to you. We're gonna create the structures, and they created the nationalization, and they created the collectives, and they dictated, this is how much you're going to get paid, this is how much you're going to receive, this is how much you need to contribute. So it wasn't the individuals that were making decisions; it was top-down decision by the commissars, by the collective decision making that is on the top, on the small, kind of a groups of people. So that's a little bit of a difference from that. Another difference is that Marx really talks about how, when you read Marx really mentions that capitalism is capable of producing fantastic amount of wealth and productivity. Capitalism has a tremendous amount of capacity for productivity, but his main criticism of that is that it ends up leading to more and more concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer hands, and that's what's going to lead to the revolution from the bottom up. But he viewed that, look, if you have this capitalism that really creates tremendous amount of wealth, but then afterwards the wealth is there, and then the workers take over, and then you collectivize and you change the control structure, but you do have that wealth, and now you can redistribute the wealth. The idea there is that you have some level of capitalist development that may represent this kind of a foundation on which that beginning of the communism, or the lower level of communism, can start. But the Soviet Union, there really wasn't there. It was in very, there was agricultural production and everything else, but it was a very kind of a hodgepodge system, especially the system to some extent almost feudal system. So the wealth wasn't there. So again, that first stage of world communism really led to disastrous results, and Lenin had to step back from that and allow some private production. That's the new economic policy, and that's what I'm going to go into next when we get started. And I want to make sure that, okay, we have the time, right? 12:30, yeah. So we have 10-minute break. During the break, I'm more than happy to be out. If you all have questions, I'm more than happy to answer any questions. After that, we're going to do an activity. Then I'll continue with the lecture. But again, with this lecture, if you have questions from what I talked about before, I'm more than happy to cover that and then revisit that. Thank you.